Hello and welcome to Cheers to Fears, where we review horror movies and turn them into drinking games. We're your two hosts. I'm Alex.
And I'm Tucker. And you may notice there's a little bit of changes with our set at the moment. We're kind of going through some changes and, mixing it up a little bit. So just bear with us. We're working with what we got in the meantime. Anyways, today we're going to be making a drinking game for The Black Phone, directed by Scott Derrickson. The movie is written by Joe Hill, who is the son of famous horror writer Stephen King. Other works written by Hill that were later turned into film are Lock and Key, Horns, and the collaboration with his father, In the Tall Grass. The other writers for this movie were Scott Derrickson and his right-hand man, C. Robert Cargill, who has helped him on works such as Sinister.
The Black Phone follows around a child named Finn as he is abducted by a man only known by the media as the Grabber, but known to the Western audience as Ethan Hawke. Finn is then trapped in the Grabber's basement with no idea how to escape except for a disconnected phone. How does this phone help Finn, you may ask? The phone connects with the spirits of the Grabber's past victims that give Finn hints on how to escape as well as avoid all the Grabber's tricks.
Since this movie was released very recently, we're going to try and avoid spoilers as much as possible. However, we may not be able to avoid some viewpoints such as how we feel about the characters, showing clips from the trailers, as well as our own opinions, so be prepared if you don't want to see any of that. If you've already seen the movie or don't care about mild spoilers, then join us in the drinking game as we post the rules on screen now. Without further ado, let's get right into the rules.
So, as always, the first rule is death. Whenever you see somebody die, you take a sip. Obviously, we're not going to be counting totals for the movie because we do want to keep this as spoiler-free as possible. And also, we don't really want to walk into a theater with the main intention of just writing and ticking down ghouls, especially on our first watch, right?
Yeah. And I guess if you've seen the trailer, you would know this, but most of the deaths are involving children. But aside from that, there's not much else to say on it, so we'll move on to rule number 2, which again, it's whenever you hear a scream, cry, or yell. And again, we don't have totals, but I think there's a pretty decent amount in this.
Yeah. These kids, I wouldn't call crybabies, but I'd call them out for crying a lot, especially Finn, but to be fair, he's abducted.
I mean, he has a reason to be crying out for help and stuff.
The daughter, or I guess Finn's sister, is crying quite a bit in the movie too.
Yeah, and again, for pretty good reason, I'd say.
Yeah. I'd also say that the little girl in the movie, honestly, I think is a better actor than Finn.
I would agree. I definitely agree. Won't get too deep into it now, but we'll talk about that later in the discussion.
Moving on, we're going to have the next rule, which is jump scares. If you see one, you take a sip.
Yep, Scott Derrickson does it again with the jump scares. Again, they're pretty effective, I would say. And he doesn't overdo it. I did hear some criticisms from people that he kind of relied on them too heavily, and I get their point of view, but I think they were done pretty good in this movie.
I don't think in this movie, in comparison to another movie like Sinister.
Sinister used them a lot more and relied on them a lot more than this movie. This one, there's maybe a handful.
There
wasn't too many.
If you want to count this a spoiler, a lot of the jump scares are from things that aren't necessarily supposed to be scary, like dead kids. If you want to call that a spoiler.
Yeah, those are where most of the jump scares are.
Yeah, including an appearance by the kids from down the lane.
Yeah, which again, both this movie and Sinister both have a scene where there's 5 children, the tallest one right in the middle, and it just resembles Codename Kids Next Door and the kids down the lane or whatever they're called.
Yeah.
And it's just so hard to unsee it once you know
it's so canny, that's
exactly.
The thing, right?
Yeah. But anyways, we'll move on to rule number 4, which is whenever the black van is seen. And it's seen pretty early on in the movie, almost instantly.
Yeah. Besides that, I think it's fairly exclusive to the beginning of the movie. It's seen a little bit in the end, I believe, maybe once or twice, once they figure out
and I think it's also in some of the dreams where we get to see it.
That's right. It's definitely in some of the dreams.
So it's sprinkled throughout, but it is more so prevalent in the beginning.
Yeah. And that's a great segue into the next rule here, because the next rule is whenever dreams are mentioned or seen, you take a sip.
Yeah, and we're not going to get too much into it, I guess, because we don't want to spoil anything. But trust us, it's going to give you quite a few drinks.
I had a dream about him.
What happened in your dream?
He was taken.
By a man with black balloons?
Yes.
And moving on to another rule that might give you quite a few drinks, it's whenever the black phone rings. And obviously this is the title of the movie, so we kind of had to include something around the black phone.
Yeah, exactly. Well, let's move on to the next rule. Rule number 7 is whenever there is missing children shown or referenced, you take a sip.
Yeah, some examples are posters, especially in the beginning. That's very prevalent. And then throughout the film, again, you see it right in the trailers, is the dead kids appearing in the room with Finn. So it's anytime you see them to keep in mind. Well, let's move on to rule number 8. It's whenever you see a rocket ship in any form, you take a sip.
Yeah, this happens, I'd say, a good amount throughout the movie. He has his... It's basically a pocket knife. Flashlight.
It's less of a knife, it just has a pointy end.
Yeah, which... Spoilers, I guess. But, I don't know. He has it on his shirt. He uses he makes a rocket ship in the baseball diamond. So
in the very beginning, yeah.
In the very beginning, so it's seen a good amount.
Oh, yeah. The main thing you're looking for, and it can be pretty subtle sometimes, is he's holding it in his hand. And it's not much bigger than the length of his hand, so it could be hard to miss. Or it could be easy to miss, sorry.
Yeah. However, let's move on to the next rule. The next rule is whenever Finn finds a clue to help him escape, you take a sip.
Yeah, actually every time it's somebody helping him by,
Yeah.
One of the dead kids is giving him some advice or tips or whatever. But, yeah, I don't know. It seems like he can't do a whole lot on his own without any help.
He really can. We'll talk about that a little bit later.
Yeah.
Especially since he's, I guess, pitched off to be a smart individual kid. But
yeah,
he doesn't come across as that. But again, we'll get into that in a little bit here.
Yeah, but for now, let's move on to the final rule of this drinking game. And it, again, kind of involves Finn in a lot of cases. It's whenever somebody gets beaten. But, I don't know, he's not the only one getting beaten in this movie, too. It's like his sister gets beaten. Some of the bullies get beaten, like you mentioned, Finn's friend kind of gives him a licking. And even the grabber sometimes gets beaten. So there's a lot of beatings in this movie.
Yeah.
And I don't know if they needed all of them, to be honest. But I think most of them served a purpose. For the most part.
Yeah. And that does it for all the rules for Black Phone. Since the movie was released this year, we did not want to give you the total number of sips in order to avoid spoilers as much as possible.
Yeah, I don't think it'll be too difficult of a drinking game. Maybe, around our average, 110, around there. 3.5 to 4 cans is my guess, but that's just a shot in the dark.
I would say the phone ringing is going to be one of the main culprits here. Also, definitely screaming, crying, and yelling, I'd say as well.
And even, like, the rocket being shown, or beatings, there's a decent amount. Like, there's a good, probably double digits for a lot of the rules, but I think they're spread out relatively well.
Yeah. So I guess it's worth mentioning that Scott Derrickson, I think, turned down the second Doctor Strange movie because of creative differences. He was replaced with Sam Raimi, another horror director, in that movie, and this gave him freedom to move to the Black Phone, from my understanding. Yeah,
and I'm actually glad that happened, because I always like to see original horror, especially in the mainstream, not just an indie film or straight to Shudder or anything like that.
Yeah.
It's got a theatrical release. I like to see that. So I'm glad he got to, be a part of this. And it was very clear that he was a part of it because his fingerprints were all over this movie. And in saying that, even some scenes in this movie looked legitimately from Sinister movie.
Oh, definitely.
Or like the first one or the second one. For example, there's like the yellow rain jacket that the daughter was wearing in this one, and the little girl was wearing in Sinister. We already mentioned the codename Kids Next Door, the kids down the lane.
Yeah.
That was like uncanny again. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. And even the house in this kind of looked a little bit similar to the one in Sinister. And at first glance, like, I had to take a second guess whether it was actually from Sinister or not. I don't think it is, but it looks very similar.
Yeah, definitely. Another example, the grainy footage, such as the film reels in Sinister.
Yeah.
That's another thing that looked a lot Scott Derrickson-esque.
Yeah.
Continuing on, the masks look very similar to Bagul's as well, like kind of the style.
The style, yeah.
Yeah. Speaking of the masks, we were considering adding it for a rule, but it's really hard to kind of keep track of when the mask changes, so we just decided to scrap it. The expressions are kind of cool for the masks. Some of them have tops, some of them don't.
Yes.
They have different expressions.
Yeah, like the frowny face or the smiley face, or even a blank expression that we see in one instance. But I do like the way they did that, how at times you just saw the top of his face, at times you just saw the bottom of his face, and then sometimes his whole face was covered with the mask. And I thought it was pretty neat, and it added an extra layer to the mask, and it made it more memorable, I guess.
Yeah, definitely. I guess now to go more in depth into the characters, I feel like Ethan Hawke, though good, was very forced into the role. Like, it seemed a complete, like, out of left field decision. I wouldn't say he was, like, excellent, like, Oscar worthy or anything like that.
No.
But I feel like that Scott Derrickson just really wanted him in the role or something like that, and just decided to cast Ethan Hawke in a movie.
Probably.
Yeah.
And I watched an interview with Ethan Hawke, and at first he didn't want to do this movie because he didn't want to be forced into a villain role and just be stuck as a villain for the rest of his career. Mm-hmm. But then he went on to say that he actually ended up coming around to the idea, and he wanted to try something new and actually end up being the villain in a movie, and he was more on board with it. But I do agree that, I don't know, he wasn't bad in the movie. I did think he filled the role nicely. Mm-hmm. But I just wish that they gave his character more backstory, and I think it falls more on the writing than it does on the acting.
Yeah, definitely. Like, there is very vague insinuations that he does have mental health issues.
Yeah.
Such as not going anywhere without a mask, pretty much.
That.
Yeah.
And also, there was some mention about how he was down in the basement, but they didn't go into much detail about that, and, like, why he was down there, or was it his family keeping him down there, or why was he doing it to the kids. They didn't go into much details. They just very quickly glossed over it seems.
Yeah.
And I guess moving on from the grabber, we'll move on to Finn now, and we did touch on it a little bit, but he's kind of an idiot in this movie in a lot of ways. Like, he's portrayed as being smart, at least academically.
Yeah, there's some things he does smart in the movie, we'll say that much.
Yes, there is.
Yeah.
But it seems throughout the entire time he's captured, he's just relying on answering the phone and getting the hints from people. And not to mention, when he's answering the phone, like, at first I could see him getting annoyed and, like, upset about it, but he should quickly catch on that every time the phone's ringing, it's somebody that's trying to help him.
And he's just like, fuck, what do you want? Go away.
And he just, the entire time, he doesn't seem grateful for it. And I don't know why he gets so butthurt every time they're calling, because it is a step in his escape. Like,
yeah.
I don't know. I just, that's something that kind of took me down a notch in his character, and I don't know, made me just think about how dumb he was in that way.
Yeah. Again, like, he does something smart, like tie a knot in the rope, creating some elaborate traps. He helps, I think it's one of the characters with his homework.
Robin.
Yeah, Robin with his homework.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's some things he does right.
Yeah.
There's a lot of things he does wrong, though. Like, honestly, this kid is not smart, to say the least.
Not street smart or something.
He's not street smart, we'll say that much. Yeah. If he has time to think, he's probably fine.
Yeah.
If he doesn't have time to think, he's kind of an idiot.
Yeah, exactly.
I feel like that's the best way to put it.
Yeah. And the last, I guess, actor that I want to talk about is the daughter, or Finn's sister. Honestly, I don't even remember her name, but I think the actor did a phenomenal job in that role. And specifically, one scene in particular sticks out to me. The scene where she's getting beaten by her father. And it's just such an intense scene and very well acted. And it hit hard and it made me feel for her. And also, another fun fact I learned about that scene is a lot of it was improvised. So the fact that it was acted so well on top of being improvised was just, it impressed me, to say the least.
Yeah, it's almost a bold statement to say that she's the best actor in the movie when you have other characters such as Ethan Hawke, right?
Technically speaking, yeah.
Yeah.
Like, that, I think that's the scene that stands out to me more than any other scene in the movie. And that's before, you really get to the meat of the plot. So that's just kind of adding to the character development side of things.
Yeah.
So one more point that I wanted to bring up that I kind of thought about over the last few days since we've seen the movie is, it almost seems to me that the grabber from this movie, the Black Phone, almost seems like a prequel to Sinister and Bagul. And let me explain why I think that. It might be a little bit of a stretch, but here's why. So, the grabber kidnaps and kills kids while he's alive, and Bagul basically kidnaps kids in death, you would say, right? He basically takes these kids and, separates them from the family and kills them. So that's a similarity. And we already mentioned how there's dead kids in the Black Phone, and how they look eerily similar to the ones from Sinister. So you could say that those dead kids that you're seeing in the Black Phone are also the ones that you're seeing in Sinister in the future. Again, might be a stretch, but it's a possibility. And then another point that we've already touched on is how similar the masks are in style. Like, they're obviously not identical, but they both look like they could be from Slipknot. So, like, the fact that they are that similar tells me that they could be linked again. So it makes me question, does the grabber eventually become Bagul in the future?
I would say it's a little bit too much of a stretch, since Bagul dates back from way too long.
Yeah, true.
Yeah. However, I do think that there are a lot of similarities between them, for sure.
Yeah, but if this movie does well in the box office, do you see them using a lot of plot conveniences to try and play it off and then eventually link them together?
Oh, it's Hollywood. They'll use plot conveniences for anything.
Yeah, so it wouldn't surprise me because it is Hollywood, but should they? Absolutely not.
I mean,
keep this as a standalone.
Yeah.
But I also wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah. So overall, what were your thoughts on the film?
Overall, I think it was a good movie. I think you should watch it. I'll probably end up rewatching it in the future. To me, it's not like it's anything extremely special. Like, it's not going to be movie of the year for me, I don't think. But it was a fun watch, worth watching. Had some unique aspects to it. A lot of it did seem like the same tone as Sinister, though. So it was, it wasn't brand new. There was some originality lacking, I think. But overall, it was definitely worth the watch. And yeah, it was a fun movie. Yeah. It won't go down in history, though, as an iconic movie. I'll say that. For
myself, I'm scared because there's a lot of hype around it. And with a lot of hype, people want sequels. As testament to that, I think it was originally screened for January, but because it got such good reviews, they moved that to June for some reason.
For a summer release, because, I don't know, I guess in the summer it's where better movies are released rather than in the winter.
January, people don't want to see movies, is the main thing.
That's usually the case, yeah.
Yeah. Besides Scream, which, honestly, I think I liked Scream more than this movie.
I would say yes, I do.
Yeah. But either way, I'm scared if it does really well in the box office, gets bad sequels, and just kind of kills just horror movies for a while. But yeah, I think it's a good watch. It's not one of those rewatch immediately kind of movies. No. But I could say it would be a top 5 movie of the year, or at least has potential.
At this point, maybe.
At this point, maybe for sure. But in comparison to some of the other films that are going to be released soon, such as Nope or the new Ari Aster film, I think it was called Disaster Boulevard or something like that. Disappointment Boulevard, that's the one. Or I think it was changed to like Mona's Choice or something like that. Who knows what's going on with that movie?
I don't know.
But I'm excited to see it.
Yeah, I don't even know. Like, I will admit I haven't seen a ton of 2022 movies this year, but I don't know if this is going to end up in my top 5. I don't even know if it'll even end up in top 10. It's hard to say.
Yeah.
I did enjoy it. It was a fun watch, but we'll see where it ends up on my list.
Definitely.
Normally, this is where we would present our Darwin Awards, but since this movie was just released, we're not going to be going into those. So if you think somebody is worthy of winning this Darwin Award, let us know in the comments down below.
And with all that being said, we hope you enjoyed our look into Black Phone. If you end up playing the game alongside the movie, or if you have any other feedback or suggestions, let us know in the comments below.
Make sure to join us next week, where we will be doing a horror-related live stream. Or if you can't catch us then, we will be doing a pair of drinking games the following week for the 2 Ouija movies. If you want to check out our most recent video, click on the box on the top right, or if you want to see a playlist of all the drinking games and movies we review, click on the box below it. Thanks for tuning in, and this is us saying, cheers to fears.